The White House is reportedly finalizing an executive action that would expand background checks on gun purchases, according to one of President Obama's top aides, Valerie Jarrett. Senior advisor Valerie Jarrett said Wednesday the president has asked his team to send him a completed plan, quote, in short order. According to the Associated Press, she was speaking at a vigil for the victims of the 2012 shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, which left 28 dead. The proposal that is reportedly being considered by President Obama would do presumably more things than we currently know about. We do know that it would classify more gun sellers as high volume dealers, and that would go a long way towards closing this legal loophole that allows a lot of sales conducted at gun shows or online to circumvent existing background check provisions. That's good. We agree with that. Most Americans agree with closing the gun show loophole. We don't really know what else would happen. And my view on this is if President Obama is going to take executive action on guns, Lewis, he is going to get hammered on it by the pro-gun right, by the NRA, by the GOA, etc. If he's going to do that, go full steam ahead and do as much as possible. And we don't yet know everything that would be in this executive action. I hope that it is extensive, because no matter what it is, when you hear executive action on guns, things are going to get very hardcore very quickly.
Things are going to get ugly. The internet might implode or explode altogether. But yes, of course, go full steam ahead. You don't have to worry about re-election. You don't really have to play politics here. And the country needs it. So, of course, do it.
The news is coming shortly after President Obama said about a week ago, reportedly asked his legal experts to carefully go through all laws, any law that might provide a sort of legal context to use executive action on guns. I worry that this is going to lead to even more gun sales. And we know that when there's a mass shooting, the fear mongering around Obama taking your guns lead to more gun sales. When President Obama starts talking about common sense gun safety regulations, people start buying guns. As soon as this becomes more widespread news, and so far it's been limited in terms of how much this has been reported on, Obama executive action on guns, this is going to be a cash cow for the gun manufacturers.
Yeah, that's unavoidable. And if you pay attention to politics and you're someone who wants to shoot up a mall or something, then you might realize now is the time to buy, and there could be those types of purchases as well. But a year from now, 2 years from now, let's assuming these background checks are still around, that's a good thing, and it will at the very least help prevent this from happening. Even if it's by the smallest amount, it's important.
You can't prevent every shooting. We know that. But just because you can't prevent every shooting doesn't mean we shouldn't do what we can to prevent some. That is how some ignore that logic I will never understand. There's been a video circulating over the last few days of Donald Trump supporters in a sort of focus group setting on CNN talking about why Donald Trump is so great and why Donald Trump appeals to them. Mostly the type of nonsense you would expect. But there's one woman named Susan DeLemus who stuck out because she seemed to completely lack any connection to reality whatsoever. And video of her has been going viral. And some of the things she said turned out to be flat out lies. She was saying her support for Trump is noteworthy because she's never been involved in politics before Donald Trump inspired her so significantly. Let me play a clip of her for you guys. Take a look at this.
As the truth goes, we've got people in positions of power who I know for a fact are liars. Liars. I watch the TV. My president comes on the TV and he lies to me. I know he's lying. He lies all the time.
Look for him.
I don't believe any one of them. Not one. I believe Donald.
Exactly.
I'm telling you, he says what I'm thinking.
Exactly.
Never been involved in politics, never had an interest in any of it. Now suddenly he is resonating. He is resonating with the people, and he's speaking our minds, our minds. When the pundits and the experts and all the people who are supposed to be in the know and know all this stuff, and they're so great.
I love it when people say pundit. Look up that word, P-U-N-D-A-N-T. Doesn't exist. The word is pundit, P-U-N-D-I-T. I love it when people say pundit. It turns out this woman has been involved in politics. She actually ran for state representative in New Hampshire 4 years ago. Does being a
Well,
Republican candidate...
I think she meant that Donald Trump was never involved in politics.
That's the counter to it, which
Yeah.
is no, she meant Trump was never involved in politics, which is also not true. So that's the funny thing. The initial thing was, oh, she says she's never been involved in politics. She ran as a Republican. Oh, no, she meant Trump hasn't been involved in politics and that Trump tells the truth, neither of which are true. But it gets better. Not only has she been involved in politics, this woman is a birther. This is a birther. She wrote a diary on the political website Daily Kos where she defended birthers as not being at all racist, and we're linking to it in the description to our YouTube video for this story. And she also fought to keep President Obama's name off of state ballots in New Hampshire because he's a, quote, treasonous liar who was not born in the United States. And it gets even crazier. DeLemis's husband, Jerry DeLemis, was part of that armed brigade at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada last year. And I mean, this woman represents the prototypical Trump supporter to me, clueless about everything that Trump has in his past, loving all of the racially tinged elements of Trump's campaign. This is the prototypical Trump supporter.
Pretty classic, yeah. And she also has what I like to call crazy eyes, but
Right.
that may have nothing to do with her being a Trump supporter.
No, coincidence, utter coincidence.
Yeah, it could be a coincidence. Not surprising to learn all of these details. Not surprising that her husband seems to be on the same page.
Yeah.
This is a Trump supporter. What else can you say?
You can't say much else. But what we can say, and this should be something we're glad about, this is not a woman who, if Trump is not the nominee, is going to say, what the heck, I'll support Carly, right? This is a crazed follower of Donald Trump's and exactly the type of person we should be encouraging to follow Trump as a third-party candidate. This woman,
Right.
this type of person could lead to an easy Democratic victory in November of 2016.
If we are so lucky, Donald Trump has to first not be the nominee, which I guess he won't. And then who knows what kinds of talks are going on behind closed doors.
Right.
If someone makes him a great deal he can't refuse, he may agree not to run as an independent. But
He makes deals, we know that.
he makes deals. He negotiates.
Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. After the break, very important interview about wealth and income inequality. Stay with us. One of the chaotic effects that Donald Trump is having on the Republican Party is forcing Republican insiders to prepare for a contested convention known to some as a brokered convention. And what this means is basically you get to the convention, which happens to be in July of 2016 in Cleveland, Ohio for the 2016 Republican convention. You get to the convention with no single candidate having a majority of the delegates before the convention starts. So you might have, I don't know, Donald Trump with 30% of the delegates to date and Ben Carson with 20%, whatever, right? But nobody has a majority. So when this happens, you have to start a sort of brokering process where you start negotiating for different delegates. Maybe Ted Cruz can get Marco Rubio's delegates to come over to him, and Ben Carson is able to get Donald Trump's delegates to come to him with the promise that Trump would be his running mate, or who knows what. And according to a number of people very familiar with Republican insiders, 20 Republican officials and insiders met for dinner last week in Washington, D.C., along with the RNC chairman, Reince Priebus, to discuss how are we going to get Donald Trump out of here if we get to the convention with no majority. So what would the reaction be? What would they do? A few options were discussed. First, possibility number one is they could get a bunch of the Republican delegates to unite around not Trump. So you get to the convention, let's say Trump has 30% of the delegates to date. That means he doesn't have 70% of the delegates to date. So if you can get Republican insiders, Mitch McConnell is being discussed and a number of others, to go around and say, listen, the Carson supporters and the Rubio supporters and the Jeb supporters and everybody else, we don't want Donald Trump to be the nominee. Let's unite and coalesce our delegates to prevent Trump from being the nominee. This is sort of the idea that is being discussed. There are more aggressive ideas, right? Going to the state level and trying to actually oust Trump from some of the primaries. More complex, politically certainly more dangerous. The fact that there is even such a meeting taking place, the fact that 20 Republican insiders have coordinated their schedules to meet for dinner on a weekday with the RNC chairman to talk about what will we do if Trump stays in the lead, that is already hugely damaging to the Republican Party because they can't spend time talking about how to go after Hillary or Bernie.
Yeah, and I am of the mindset that we shouldn't have delegates in the first place. But anyway, we do. Delegates are people. I mean, they're kind of like voters.
Yeah.
And we know how the Republican Party overall feels about Donald Trump. So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone is conspiring here. And somehow Donald Trump is still, in full entertainer mode, maintaining his lead. And I think there's going to be a lot of drama here.
It's been funny to see the Republican side more and more on Trump start to sort of adjust their barometer. First, it was, listen, Trump's not going to run. Then it was, well, he's not going to get any traction whatsoever. And then it's, oh, well, he's going to be out soon, even though he's starting to poll well. And then it's, well, he's polling well now, and he's going to stay in for a while, but he's eventually going to fade away without winning any states. And now it's, well, he might win some states, but we're going to figure out how to get him out at the convention. I don't know how far he will go. My position from the get-go has been Donald Trump will not be the eventual Republican nominee, and I stand by that. What happens between now and the announcement of the eventual nominee, I don't know, but I maintain Trump will not be the Republican nominee. I hope, for the benefit of Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, that Trump stays in this as long as possible.
Yeah, that's good for all involved. Certainly good for the media and anyone reporting on what's happening in politics. It's, I hate to say it, but Donald Trump is really just great business for everybody.
I have a great clip of Carly Fiorina, the former Hewlett-Packard CEO and current Republican presidential candidate, the only female Republican presidential candidate, getting called out for her lies about Planned Parenthood on CNN by Chris Cuomo. This is absolutely terrific, and it got ugly really quickly. Chris Cuomo asked reasonable questions like, do you regret all of that anti-abortion rhetoric where you talked about Planned Parenthood selling baby parts when we now know those videos were doctored, when we now know the story was totally bogus? And Carly Fiorina did not like it. She was visibly angry. She was telling Chris, she was almost like issuing thinly veiled threats about, yeah, you're a journalist, Chris, so on and so forth. Let's take a look at the video. Let's listen to the audio. This is really great stuff.
Predictive. Never. They never have been. So we got a long way to go.
Now, when we're looking with what happened here in Colorado, very often you said Trump's got to watch what he says. It has implications. Do you feel any sense of regret about how you characterized what was going on at Planned Parenthood after the attack in Colorado because of what the man said, which seems as though he was influenced by some of the rhetoric that was coming out of you and others that painted a very ugly picture, an unfair one, about Planned Parenthood?
Oh, please. Really, Chris? Look, 9 videotapes have come out about Planned Parenthood. It is very clear what they have been doing. And in fact, Planned Parenthood several weeks ago made a quiet little announcement that they would no longer accept compensation for the sale of what they call fetal tissue. That's about as close to an admission as you can get. In fact, it is an admission. Look, what happened in Colorado is a terrible thing. This guy is a deranged murderer, and I hope he is put away for life. It may be that we should be classifying that as domestic terrorism as well, but that has nothing to do with the truth of what is going on in Planned Parenthood. And this is a typical left-wing tactic to try and shut down the truth by silencing people. This has happened over and over and over again.
Ms. Fiorina,
let's focus on...
The question doesn't go away. The videos were edited. You know that. The scenes that were depicted...
I don't know that.
Well,
there has been forensic evidence of those 9 videotapes over and over again. There have been reports that say they are not edited. So
of course they were edited.
It's amazing to me that we're still having this conversation.
No. Let's be careful about what we're saying. Of course they were edited. What you're saying
is very careful about what we're saying,
You're
Chris.
saying that
very careful about what we're saying.
You're saying that the raw portions of the video substantiate the claims that you and others made. That has not been proven to any satisfaction in any objective way. There were scenes and pictures depicting horrible things that nobody should want to see that weren't authentic and weren't germane to the conversation within the video. We had the guy on
Chris,
here. He couldn't justify it. Now you have somebody who went out and killed in the name of that.
Really? Really? Okay, I don't recall, Chris. Careful. You're a journalist.
Okay,
yes.
There we go.
Recall.
Yeah, let's be careful, Chris. Careful, Chris. You're a journalist. she's continuing the lies. She doesn't want to believe or admit that the videos were bogus. And she talks about a typical left-wing tactic. It's a typical right-wing tactic to call any criticism a left-wing tactic. That's the real tactic on full display here.
Yeah, I think that there are plenty of ways she could have addressed the things she said, her rhetoric about the incident as it relates to the murder, rather than just going after Planned Parenthood still. Right. But I mean, I don't know, maybe this fires her base up. Maybe this is a political move.
This is the last thing she has, right? She's not resonating with anybody on anything else. So she's just trying to pull that 2-3% of the evangelical vote that is only focused on the Planned Parenthood issue by continuing to parrot this stuff. The shooter in the Colorado Planned Parenthood attack talked about Planned Parenthood and baby parts. Where on earth did he get those ideas? From people like Carly Fiorina and the videos that she was talking about, the incredible authenticity of those videos. This is embarrassing for her. She should be ashamed that she has to go and talk to Chris Cuomo about being careful in order to distract from the lies that she's still telling. Absolutely incredible. I'm joined today by Sarah Haider, who's a writer, public speaker, activist, and founder of Ex-Muslims of North America, a community building organization for those who have left Islam. Sarah, you were born in Pakistan. You were raised in Texas. Talk to us a little bit about how religious your family was growing up.
Well, I was pretty lucky in the sense that my parents weren't extremely religious. What I would call is I would say that they're liberal, not liberal in the American sense, but liberal compared to many Muslim families in the sense that I was allowed to go away to college. I really didn't have to lobby hard to do that, but I was allowed to move away from home to do that. So I would say relatively liberal. And that's part of the reason that I'm able to do this, that I'm able to be a public speaker, that I'm able to talk about my lack of religiosity, because I don't actually have to fear my family.
And as you were growing up, were there other Muslim families that you would sort of see and realize that there was a difference between the religiosity of your family and theirs?
Absolutely. I mean, even within my own family, it's not, I didn't have to look out into the community to see how more religious families behaved and the restrictions that were imposed, especially on the women in more religious families. I just had to look to see my cousins. But of course, we were part of the broader Muslim community in Houston. So I did see what some of the more hardcore Muslims, how they lived and how they interacted.
How did the transition out of Islam start to happen? I mean, I know you started reading the Quran with a more critical eye, and that eventually led to you leaving religion. But what was it that really catalyzed you even wanting to read the Quran more critically?
Well, I mean, a huge part of it was just being in America and knowing that there were people that thought differently than I did. I mean, that in itself makes you be a little bit curious about, why other people are rejecting your belief, if it is so obvious and so clearly the truth. But I did come into contact with quite a few atheists, which pushed me into, I think, more directly out of religion, because I think they were a little bit more direct in confronting me about my faith and what I believed, and challenging me truly to defend it.
Was there any particular issue or teaching or sacred text from Islam that had the most impact on you in terms of pushing you away, be it teaching about women or teaching about education or whatever the case may be? Was there a particular issue that really struck you?
Well, I mean, I think this is something that a lot of ex-Muslim women can relate to, which is specifically the way that the Islamic religion and the tradition treats women. There's that infamous verse in the Quran which basically states that it's okay to discipline a wife, for a husband to discipline a wife by beating her. And this is something that was really difficult for me to square with my belief before, which was that Islam is a religion that is equal for men and women, and then women are treated very well in Islam. That's what I thought. So once I started reading into the Quran and really looking into it, and especially coming across those verses in particular, it was really hard for me to hold on to it any longer, to justify my faith in it.
I'd be curious to hear from you what the reaction was from different communities to you leaving Islam. And among those, I would love to hear what the reaction was first from the family you mentioned, the parts of your family that are more devout, more religious. And then you said you were part of the broader Muslim community in Houston, which is a significant community. What was the reaction there?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really very active in those communities any longer. So I don't actually have a direct view to see how they actually would behave towards me and how they would feel about me, because what my lack of faith has done has really pushed me away from them, and really pushed me away from people that I consider my friends, people I consider my close associates. So I would imagine that they're not too happy about it, but there is that distance there that is preventing me from really having any conversations with anybody.
In some of the speeches of yours that I've watched, you take what I consider to be a pretty nuanced approach to the problems that exist within some Muslim communities today, in the sense that you, of course, point out that it is completely unfair and out of place and completely unproductive to criticize Muslims as people broadly for the actions taken by a very small portion of Muslims. At the same time, though, you've pointed out the broader and more prevalent problems that exist, including some of the ones I've looked at that we can see sort of illuminated by the 2013 Pew Research study on beliefs held by Muslims around the world, etc. Have you been characterized as anti-Muslim by some?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the knee-jerk reaction I think that people have. And what I found that no matter how nuanced I am, no matter how verbally I speak about anti-Muslim bigotry and about difficulties and persecutions that are faced by the Muslim community in America and in the West in general, it hasn't really helped that image very much. And it's kind of disheartening because it's difficult to see any way that you can get away with criticizing Islam, the belief system as a whole, without being painted as a bigot, without being painted as anti-Muslim in some way. So I've begun to understand the struggle that some other people that have been speaking out against Islam face, which is that it's really difficult to find any way of doing it without and escape being called these things.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we've recently, with the different stories that have been in the news, in the same discussion, I will point out that it is completely unfair, for example, to call on any random Muslim person to denounce Muslim terrorism because they are just random people with no connection to those events. And I'll be criticized for saying that. And at the same time, Sarah, I will say, hey, we also need to remember that, as I mentioned, according to that 2013 Pew Forum study, over a billion of the then 1.62 billion Muslims on this planet believe that, for example, Sharia law should be the law of a country, and that is also an extremist belief that we should be challenging. And then the left will criticize me, saying I'm not being culturally sensitive, and I'm being anti-Muslim, and I'm being unfairly critical. And it seems like on this issue, if you speak with nuance, you're opening yourself up to criticism from both and all sides. And I'm wondering if you've experienced the same thing.
Well, absolutely. And that's the funny thing about it, isn't it? Is that if you do speak with nuance, if you do try to listen to the difficulties facing both sides and what their needs are and why they are addressing what they are, you find yourself attacked by both. It's not that you win more hearts and minds, which makes it really difficult to continue on in this nuanced way. And I can see why in the broader political atmosphere you see people polarized. I mean, extremely polarized when it comes to the discussion around Islam as a religion and an ideology. It's really difficult to find anyone walking that middle path because it seems that no one is really interested in hearing somebody that is walking that middle path and that is speaking about this in a nuanced way. And I think that especially what you were saying with remembering that these are people and any individual isn't directly responsible, of course, for the actions of somebody, of extremists, of people like ISIS, but at the same time, keeping into account that these practices that are practiced on a very broad scale are very harmful to a lot of people, especially women and especially sexual minorities.
And along those lines, you co-authored a very interesting article after Reza Aslan became quite well known in many circles as a sort of defender of the faith. You wrote a very specific and precise critique of some of the things he was saying, and you felt, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of to open up this discussion, you felt that he was being misleading about Islam and women's rights, Islam and the desire for Sharia law, and a number of other issues. Can you talk to us a little bit about how he first got on your radar and why you decided to write this article about him?
Well, there was this video, this CNN appearance that Reza did, where he goes on with these two hosts, and I think he was discussing initially Bill Maher and the new atheists in general, but then he got onto the subject of Islam as a whole,
right? And
he started, expanding upon it. And this video was being shared by everyone that I knew on Facebook, on social media overall. That was being emailed to me that look at this wonderful nuanced video, and I watched it and I listened to it and I thought, so much of this is not true, and so much of this is very misleading. But it's the kind of thing that people want to hear. I mean, there's a sense of we should be fair to Muslims, because here you have, ISIS that is depicting this view of Islam as a very extremist religion. So there's a tendency for many to want someone to say that, no, it is actually peaceful, and look at all these wonderful things that happen in the name of Islam, I think, to bring some balance into it. But we do have to remember that we have to have, this conversation has to be honest, and it cannot be just about politics or any sense of, PR, which is, I think, what's going on in many different ways. We have to talk about being honest about what's going on in Islam, what's going on in Muslim communities, and remember to be compassionate towards the people within them.
The reaction, I had a similar reaction to your reaction when those videos started going viral, and I was truly disappointed, Sarah, to see those my fellow progressives, those presumably on the left, criticizing me as a sort of Zionist Islamophobe by virtue of me happening to have been born into a Jewish family, based on what I felt was a pretty nuanced and sober critique of some of the areas where I felt Reza was being misleading. And that, I expect this from the hard right, that themselves are often anti-woman, anti-against minorities of other kinds, etc. But it's particularly hurtful to me and also discouraging when I see it from those on the left. And I don't know if you have that same sense.
Absolutely, and you're right. The things that I brought up about Reza's article, and the things that I talk about in general, these are basic liberal principles. These are about basic human rights, women's rights, respect for autonomy, and a certain amount of civil liberties and freedom to believe what you want. I mean, these should be things that all liberals should align with us with. And one thing that I have found, I've spoken to activists from across the world. I've talked to a lot of people who were, in the Middle East or were in parts of South Asia, and they're liberals and they're fighting for women's rights and they're fighting for liberal values, and they come to America and or any part of the West, and they think that they will find a lot of allies in the American left and in the Western left overall, but then they're disheartened to find that that's not what's happening, and in fact that they're being painted as bigots, as sellouts, as tools for the right wing. And it's very discouraging. I mean, it's very discouraging to be abandoned by people that should be ours. These are our values. These are our principles, and it's discouraging to be abandoned.
Could not say it better myself. I'll remind you, we've been speaking with Sarah Haider, writer, public speaker, activist, and of course, founder of Ex-Muslims of North America. Sarah, it's been so great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, David.
Last night was the final Republican presidential primary debate of the year. Not actually the last one. We will have one on January 14th in South Carolina. Going into last night's debate, Trump 33, Cruz 16, Rubio 13, Carson 12, Bush 4. No one else even had 3. Here with me to break down last night's debate is the host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, Benjamin Dixon. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here, David. Thanks so much.
You did watch the debate, right? I didn't even ask you. I just assumed you would have watched it.
Unfortunately, I had to watch it.
This debate, I thought, had some clear winners and some clear losers. And I'll talk about who I thought my winners were. But did you think someone stood out as doing particularly well?
In terms of the context that they were doing it in,
yeah.
I think Rand Paul did a great job. I don't think Donald Trump lost anything. but there were some clear losers.
Yeah.
But again, this is in the context of what they were performing, their performance last night.
Yeah, the bar was not particularly high for what it means to do well in a Republican debate. We have our segment producer, Noah Ferguson, pulled some clips overnight for us. And I want to go to the first one. I think Rand Paul did really well in this debate. And sometimes I joke that he sounds somewhat reasonable. He sounded far more reasonable than anybody else on that stage, even more than Kasich, in part because Kasich did not really get to speak very much. The first clip here is Rand Paul with a total takedown of Marco Rubio's disjointed foreign policy ideas. Let's take a look.
This has been a very big issue for you. You hear many of your colleagues are calling for increased surveillance by law enforcement. You call that hogwash. Why is that hogwash?
You know, I think Marco gets it completely wrong here. We are not any safer through the bulk collection of all Americans' records. In fact, I think we're less safe. We get so distracted by all of the information, we're not spending enough time getting specific information on terrorists. The other thing is the one thing that might have stopped Senator Bernardino, that might have stopped 9/11, would have been stricter controls on those who came here. And Marco has opposed at every point increased security, border security for those who come to our country. On his Gang of Eight bill, he would have liberalized immigration, but he did not, and he steadfastly opposed any new border security requirements for refugees or students. Last week, I introduced another bill saying we need more security, we need more scrutiny. Once again, Marco opposed this. So Marco can't have it both ways. He thinks he wants to be this, oh, I'm great and strong on national defense, but he's the weakest of all the candidates on immigration. He is the one for an open border that is leaving us defenseless. If we want to defend the country, we have to defend against who's are coming in. And Marco has more of an allegiance to Chuck Schumer and to the liberals than he does to conservatives.
Yeah, so I don't agree with the policies that are connected to what Rand Paul is saying, but it was takedown after takedown, specifically informed about the policies that each candidate likes, and very good breakdowns, again, within the context that this is the Republican debate. I think this is the guy who can go the deepest of any of these candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. Within the context, not agreeing with everything that he said, he hammered Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
And Marco Rubio did not have the capacity to come back.
And usually he either would go to wiping sweat off of his face, drinking water, or laughing, which is his common move. Ben Carson going about it a different way. Ben Carson opening the debate. First of all, there's nothing lower energy than having a moment of silence during your opening statement, right? Which is what Ben Carson did. But then the first time he was allowed to speak further, he complained about his speaking time. Let's look at that.
Marco still misunderstands the immigration issue.
Which I don't think is this, right?
What I
Listen,
put
I think
forward
we do have
was an amendment.
Let's see here. I believe we do. Let me just make sure I get this right here.
Marco still...
And that's not it either.
That's not it. No, that was Rand Paul.
I think this is it right here.
Okay, let's look.
What do you consider anti-American? Well, first of all, let me just complain a little bit. This is the first time I've spoken, and several people have had multiple questions, so please try to pay attention to that.
Okay. Is this ever a good strategy? Because like when Ted Cruz criticizes the moderators, I think it's usually bogus, but he does it in a way where he doesn't come off as petty. You know, I don't think that this was a good opening for Carson.
Yeah, Carson's complaining comes off as not only petty, but inept and weak.
Right.
Ted Cruz, as much as I dislike everything about him,
Yeah.
at least he comes off bold. And again, that's within the Republican framework.
So let's get to actual comments from Ben Carson about policy. Ben Carson was asked what I thought was a really good question, which was, you talk about how much of a devout Seventh-day Adventist or Adventist you are. Would you be able to adhere to your religion and deal with the inevitable thousands of casualties that would result from some of the military action you're suggesting? This was a great question. I don't think Ben Carson really answered it the first time through, but then he got upset with the follow-up, and the crowd got upset with the follow-up question. I think it was a fair follow-up, but let's take a look at the video.
Dr. Carson, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you're a pediatric neurologist surgeon. Neurosurgeon. And people admire and respect and are inspired by your life story, your kindness, your evangelical core support. We're talking about ruthless things tonight. Carpet bombing, toughness, war. And people wonder, Could you do that? Could you order airstrikes that would kill innocent children by not the scores, but the hundreds and the thousands? Could you wage war as a commander-in-chief?
Well, interestingly enough, you should see the eyes of some of those children when I say to them, we're going to have to open your head up and take out this tumor. They're not happy about it, believe me. And they don't like me very much at that point. But later on, they love me. Sometimes I sound like him. Later on, they really realize what's going on. And by the same token, you have to be able to look at the big picture and understand that it's actually merciful
Right.
if you go ahead and finish the job rather than death by 1,000 pricks.
So you are okay with the deaths of thousands of innocent children and civilians? It's like...
You got it. You got it.
That is what war...
Okay. I guess the criticism from the audience is it was sort of a gotcha, which is you're trying to get him to say, I don't care if 1,000 kids died. But it's a serious question, which is, fine, you're recognizing that there's a greater good in those thousands of deaths, but you're still okay with it. I thought it was a fair follow-up.
I think it was a fair follow-up, but I also think there was some validity to what Ben Carson answered, how he answered. It was a long way around to simply get to this one point. Let's finish the job right away instead of dying by 1,000 deaths.
So in other words, the follow-up was fair, but you think that he did sort of answer it in his initial answer,
Yeah,
saying, sometimes doing the full thing is the right thing long-term.
Yeah, absolutely. He just took entirely too long to get to that, and I think he lost everyone with opening up kids' heads. I don't know how that applied, but the last 5 words actually made sense to the question.
That's good. If he had skipped to the last 5 words, then he'd have saved everybody 90 seconds. Okay, let's go back to Rand Paul, who again I think had a very, very good night, although probably will not make any impact in the polls. Rand Paul asked about Donald Trump being a serious candidate. His takedown of Trump was fantastic. I don't think Trump supporters care, and here's Trump's follow-up as well.
I'd like to also go back to, though, another question, which is Donald Trump a serious candidate? The reason I ask this is if you're going to close the internet, realize, America, what that entails.
Yeah.
That entails getting rid of the First Amendment, okay? It's no small feat. If you are going to kill the families of terrorists, realize that there's something called the Geneva Convention we're going to have to pull out of. It would defy every norm that is America. So when you ask yourself, whoever you are that think you're going to support Donald Trump, think, do you believe in the Constitution? Are you going to change the Constitution?
Mr. Trump.
Yeah. So I thought that it was a very good takedown of Donald Trump, but I don't think anybody cares at this point. If you're supporting Trump at this point, you're not going to be thrown off your game because Rand Paul makes a couple of good points.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be a supporter of Donald Trump at this point and actually care about cogent arguments.
Exactly. That's exactly my thought. And so Rand Paul, as well as he did, I don't know who he can really score the points with, because he's not going to take away Trump supporters with logic and reminding people about the Bill of Rights.
Maybe that 16% that are in the poll from, I believe it was New York Times, that said that they are strongly against Donald Trump's Muslim policy.
Yeah.
Maybe that percentage.
One interesting moment, there was some thought that after the comments Ted Cruz was caught on video as having made about Donald Trump, that maybe Trump would go after Ted Cruz. Trump asked about Ted Cruz's temperament. He did not take the bait. Here's what he said.
I like that better, but we have to... Who would be... I just can't imagine somebody booing.
No, this was a different clip. That's okay, though. That was when Trump started criticizing the crowd for booing, which is fine. Trump apparently just tells the crowd when they can and can't boo. He doesn't know why they're booing. Fine. Now let's go to the Trump comments on Cruz's temperament.
Dana, you have a question on this.
Mr. Trump, just this weekend you said Senator Cruz is not qualified to be president because he doesn't have the right temperament and acted like a maniac when he arrived in the Senate. But last month you said you were open to naming Senator Cruz as your running mate.
I did.
So why would you be willing to put somebody who's a maniac one heartbeat away from the presidency?
But I've gotten to know him over the last 3 or 4 days. He has a wonderful temperament. He's just fine. Don't worry about it.
Weird, right? I didn't get, I mean, it's, with everything that's been going on, I mean, is this Trump turning over a new leaf? I didn't really get it.
No, this is Trump's very manipulative way of marginalizing somebody with compliments, right? It's a very strategic move. You're a good guy. You're just not as good or as smart as me.
He's such not a threat to Trump.
Exactly.
That there's no risk whatsoever to Trump to just saying, this is a good guy. Don't worry about this guy. This is a good guy. That's interesting. I did not consider that. Last clip I want to play. Donald Trump was asked about his commitment to the Republican Party, and he said yesterday he would abide by that pledge he signed not to run as an independent. That made some news. Ben Carson's answer when asked about his commitment to the Republican Party was utterly insane, and I want to play that for you now.
Trump just committed to stay the distance regardless of the result. How about you?
Well, you know, the statement that I made last week that I would leave the party was contingent upon whether, in fact, the party acts like they have in the past with a lot of subterfuge and dishonesty, or like they're going to act now, because I spoke to Reince Priebus, and he assured me that the Washington Post
okay, we don't need to hear the rest. So what was that answer? Was that, you know, depending on, you know, the Republican Party has done some stuff, but then sometimes they've done other stuff, and I might stay the course.
You have to be able to translate foolishness with Ben Carson, because buried in there was actually a decent answer. I would go independent if they continue doing what they're trying to do with a brokered convention.
Right.
This was in there, but you have to unwrap it from all of the other, you know, cut down your words, Ben Carson. Cut it down and say what you want to say. He and John Kasich really have a problem with saying too many words and their message getting completely lost.
Yeah,
So,
I watch it and I say, what point is he trying to make? I hear a lot of words, but I don't hear a lot of messages. So those were some of the highlights for me from last night's Republican debate. Big news this morning. Pharma bro Martin Shkreli has been arrested. This is, of course, the pharmaceutical entrepreneur from Daraprim who made headlines as this internet villain, this pharma villain, over the last few months after he purchased the rights to a drug and then increased prices at somewhere around 5,000% per pill. We talked about this arrest has nothing to do with the Daraprim situation whatsoever. We talked about this investigation that was going on of the now 32-year-old Shkreli when he was involved as the manager of a hedge fund called MSMB Capital Management and chief executive of a biotech firm named Retrofin. There's this lawsuit that surfaced alleging that he was basically using the company Retrofin as a personal piggy bank to fund personal expenses and all sorts of stuff. And further, that when the company started not doing so well, he started, or rather when his hedge fund started not doing so well, he started hiring as consultants people he wanted to do favors for at Retrofin and paying them consultant salaries. I mean, absolutely, if true, horrible, fraudulent allegations, misuse of corporate funds, just really, really bad. And he was arrested this morning at his Manhattan, New York City apartment. We don't ultimately know what will happen. He has been charged with securities fraud. And a lot of people emailing me about the story saying, yeah, I don't really care that it has nothing to do with the Daraprim thing. This guy deserved to be jailed. And I don't know that I really buy into that type of thing. Yeah, this guy did something that I consider to be completely unethical and against what our focus should be with regard to the healthcare system, but he did not do anything illegal by raising the prices. The broader system allows for that because we've decided this is a for-profit game, that of pharmaceuticals. These are separate charges, and if the charges are true, then he should absolutely be tried, prosecuted, and whatever punishment is appropriate. But for me, it's similar to saying, well, you know, OJ may have killed his wife, his ex-wife, but he was found not guilty, so then I think he should be given a harsh sentence for the armed robbery to get his memorabilia back because he wasn't found guilty for the killing of Nicole Brown Simpson. I don't buy into that. You know, that doesn't strike me as the way we should be looking at these things.
Yeah, I think it's clear that he's not the nicest guy. Definitely into some shady stuff. Not seemingly not a moral guy. So yeah, would I say he deserved it? Yeah, probably. But you're right. I mean, I guess Americans can only point the fingers at themselves. That he was allowed to do what he did with Daraprim, right?
Well, I don't know, point the fingers at themselves, but certainly at our legislators and big pharmaceutical
that
companies.
Type of that's legal because there was legislation passed and laws passed that allowed that to happen. That came from Congress. and who elected those people.
I know what you're saying, but the average individual, they say, okay, all I can do is vote, and they have no control over the fact that the people they elect often don't represent their legislative ideals. That's not the fault of the individual voter.
Well, we could get into why, why the names that are on the ballot, are presented to them and why those are the people they have to vote for.
Yeah.
But, there is something to be said about low information voters. That's a huge problem.
That's a problem, but also a problem is that whoever we elect usually doesn't do what it is we want them to do. The Shkreli story, though, is wild and fascinating, right? First, he jacks up the price of this HIV drug, becomes an internet villain overnight. Then it turns out he's like a former emo guy who likes funding indie labels, and he bought a secret Wu-Tang album for $2 million. We didn't even report on that, but that's something else that it was uncovered Shkreli was involved with. And then now he gets busted by the FBI at his Manhattan apartment for a totally different lawsuit, alleging all sorts of crazy stuff he did at a different company altogether. This is a guy who, although you can't make money from things you've done illegally, probably has a pretty interesting book to write.
Yeah, Dave. And I hear he's going to charge $10,000 a piece for that book.
Yeah. It's going to be a record expensive book, and it will be, he's going to buy the rights to the publishing of the book as opposed to just going through a regular publisher and then jack up the price of his own book, at which point nobody will buy it because, quite frankly, you don't need that book to survive the way you do the pills that he jacked the price up on. Wheaton College is an evangelical Christian college, and it has now disciplined Professor Larisha Hawkins, who put on a headscarf in solidarity with Muslims and said that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. In a statement on Tuesday, the school said she has been placed on administrative leave over, quote, significant questions regarding the theological implications of recent remarks she made about the relationship between Christianity and Islam. In other words, she was put on leave, the school claims, not because of the headscarf, but because she said that there is the same God in Christianity and in Islam. She posted photographs to her Facebook page where she was wearing a Muslim head covering. She pledged to wear it at work, and the school made clear that it is not because of the headscarf that she was suspended. She said that she has received pushback almost exclusively from other Christians for wearing the headscarf, and now college president Philip Ryken says she is suspended and that it is because of her words, not the scarf. This is so crazy to me because, listen, it's a Christian college. They have these agreements, statements of faith, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not arguing that they can't do this legally. They probably can. That's a horrible thing, but that is what it is. What's crazy to me is that she is basically saying her opinion about two religions' gods that we don't even know if they exist, right? I mean, we're talking about gods here. Her opinion about the gods of two religions is a different opinion than the opinion about the gods of two religions that her employer has. And that disagreement is so great that they need to suspend her, right? It's crazy to me that when we're talking about are the gods of different religions connected or not, people really get fired up enough about that for it to lead to suspensions of tenured college faculty.
Yeah, well, this tends to be arguments like this and things like this happen frequently with Christian organizations, the schools, the churches, they have an image to maintain. They're worried about PR issues.
Right.
And so things like this happen. But still, it's a tiny, tiny minority in both Islam and Christianity, a very small minority of the people who actually come out and say, our religions are very similar. I support your religion. You support my religion.
All worship the God of Abraham, although with different backstories, of course.
But so few, there are so few people in both religions who take that stance. Most of them say, no, ours is the right religion, and you should be reading our book.
It's almost going in the direction of thought crime, right? The concept popularized by George Orwell's 1984 novel. Yeah, she said it, but this is basically she thinks the wrong thing about the relationship of her religion to Islam. That's the problem. Her thoughts about it are incorrect, and I guess the problem, of course, in this case was that she said it. Very, very disturbing, and we'll see what ultimately happens. We don't even know if this is a suspension with or without pay at this point, or at least as of this morning when I looked at the recent articles, it was not clear.